Thank you for listening to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to share that the dates for the 2026-27 Distinguished PE virtual course have been announced. This will be our third time offering this 10-session, year-long professional development course. It's an amazing opportunity to learn from PE teachers from across the country. You can also use the course to earn up to 15 graduate credits through Colorado State University, or 100 hours toward renewing your teaching license. Additionally, those 15 graduate credits can be used to earn a master's degree. As always, email me at gary@distinguishedpe.com if you have any questions. Head over to www.distinguishedpe.com and click on Virtual Course for more information. We hope you'll register and join us for our first session on August 4th. My guest today is Liz Potash, who has been teaching for 23 years. After teaching nearly 2 decades at the middle and high school levels, Liz is now in her 5th year teaching K-6 PE at Goodnoe Elementary School in the Council Rock School District located in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, a suburb outside of Philadelphia. For the last 14 years, she has also served as the district curriculum coordinator, where she oversees the health and PE programs for all 14 schools, with about 40 teachers under her lead. Liz is a strong believer in the importance of making health and PE meaningful and relevant while building strong relationships with her students. In this episode, Liz and I talk about how PE should go beyond just games, how to ensure that all students feel welcome in the gym, the importance of keeping the E in PE, how to differentiate for the various needs of diverse learners, and other topics. And now I bring you Liz Potash. Liz, welcome.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your recent award, Shape Pennsylvania 2025 Teacher of the Year.
Thank you. Very honored and humbled at the same time.
We both feel strongly that PE is more than just about playing games. I actually thought about you yesterday because there was a Facebook post last night and a teacher had asked, I don't have a plan yet for tomorrow. And then the question was, what's everyone playing? And I was like, oh, I got to tell Liz that because we don't really want to talk about what we're playing. We want to talk about what we're teaching this week or what students are learning. So luckily, I found the strength to just let it go without commenting. But I digress. What are the key components that you try to include in each of your lessons in order to make them truly meaningful for students so that they're actually learning and they're not just playing games?
Yeah, I'm laughing at the post. When I first started, I started teaching in middle school and we had a sign. This was 2002, so I'm dating myself. But there was a sign on our office door that said, it's not what are we playing today, what are we learning today? So as my first teaching experience, that was huge to walk into and see that, to know that we valued that it was a learning experience. And obviously we just do it through movement. To your point, I think the main things that I try to incorporate, I really have taken a lot from a lot of different resources that I've learned over the years. But in every lesson that I teach, there is a clearly written what, how, and why for every single lesson. And so the students know it by now. They expect it by now. They come in, they know what we're doing. They know how they're learning it. So what are the assessment pieces? And those are generally formative. We're not taking out paper and pencil. It's a lot of thumb check-ins and things like that. But then the biggest piece of that is the why. And so every single lesson that we have, they will know why it's important to be learning it. And even if it is what others might see as a game, to me, there's so much more to it. So whether it's the sportsmanship component, whether it's the transferable skill that you needed for this game and you can use it in another game, and there's always the lifelong application of it as well. So there's so many pieces that go behind the scenes where the kids, hopefully, if you're doing it well, they just think they're playing a game, but we all know that they're getting so much more out of it.
I love the what, why, and the how, and also how when you make something like that a routine, students just expect it. Students know that you're going to communicate a standards-based objective to them, and they're going to know exactly what it looks like to make progress towards that. I always like to ask folks from outside of Colorado, Denver specifically, because we have a pretty unique set of expectations here where students have to make physical progress towards a standards-based skill, just as they would everywhere else, underhand throwing, for example. They also have to be able to articulate their learning. Do you have anything similar to that? Like when you say assessment, What is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for just that physical progress, or is there also something else that students have to do to articulate what they're learning that day?
So for us, we don't have anything that is standards based by the state that is actually assessed for us. In fact, with all the talk now about presidential physical fitness testing potentially coming back and things like that, we don't have those types of assessments in Pennsylvania. Our report cards now are standards based according to our national standards. I was able to make that change a couple years ago in the district, which was nice. But for us, when I'm talking about assessment, it is what is my check-in at the end of each lesson to know that they have absorbed. And some of it is physically based, right? So if we're doing something that has to do with an overhand throw, I'm going to assess, do you have the key components? We'll talk about accuracy. We'll talk about all those pieces. But many times too, my assessment is, were you a good teammate today? Did you show good sportsmanship? Did you encourage somebody? And we'll talk a lot about that aspect as well. So they don't have anything per se that needs to be shown that I need to report out to the state. Again, it is done through like our report cards, but I think it's why it's even more important to bring so much more meaning to it because we don't have anyone holding us accountable for it. We have to hold each other accountable.
That's really interesting. So, I guess an example of what that would look like here, based on the expectations that we have for our PE teachers in Denver, if you were going to align your lesson to a standards based social skill, like the example you just gave, something like what does it look like to be a good teammate? Students would have to demonstrate that, obviously, throughout the lesson in whatever activity that you have planned for them. And then there would be a series of questions, usually two or three, that the teacher would ask throughout the lesson, including one at the end, like a closure, whether it's a verbal exit ticket or every once in a while, I'll see a written assessment. But students would have to reflect on that. So the teacher might ask them at the beginning of the lesson to talk to a friend and tell them what it's going to look like today to be a good teammate to someone. They might catch up with students individually throughout the lesson while they're playing the game and ask them what they're currently doing to be a good teammate. And then at the end of the lesson, they might ask them what it looks like to bring some of those values and those qualities into something outside of PE. So how are you going to show a value of communication or collaboration or whatever it is that you did today to demonstrate good sportsmanship or being a good teammate in your general ed class, like in your classroom, at recess, on the bus, etc.?
No, I love that. I do that. I very much incorporate that into my lessons, but it's nothing that I guess is state mandated. The closest thing that we have to that is that in Pennsylvania, our evaluation system that we're used, you do have different learning goals and learning progresses. And I never make it one of those physical skills. I always make it one of those value type skills. So for example, this year it is about sportsmanship. One of the biggest things I noticed when I came down to the elementary school, it was a real problem being good sports. Kids were super highly competitive, which I loved, but I always remind them there's no one more competitive in the gym in any moment than me. And we can still be a good sport in that time. So we do have a lot of those conversations. We talk about what does it look like? What does it sound like? They'll share that out. I'll check in with them during class. And then it's a huge focus at the end of class. Like, how many of you were, a good teammate today? And I force them to give high fives and fist bumps. And, we talk about what that looks like outside when you're playing sports outside of school. But then to your point as well, what does it look like to be a good teammate in the classroom? What does it look like to be a good teammate at home? So we don't have a formal process, I guess, in terms of how that needs to be evaluated, but it's a huge area of focus for myself when I'm teaching.
One of the goals that all PE teachers have is they want students to participate at high levels. And in order for students to be engaged, they need to feel safe and welcome in what can be at times an intimidating environment. What routines, types of interactions, or instructional choices help you build strong relationships and a positive culture in your PE program?
This is a really difficult one because I think so many times when people think about PE, they think about what their experience was and they think about the dodgeball or the climbing the ropes and things like that. And, trying to break that barrier where that's not what we are anymore. And the idea that the gym is a safe space for everyone to participate. And I start the year by reminding them all, none of you tried out to be in your homeroom teacher's phys ed class, right? This is not your outside sports. You are here to move your bodies and to have fun. So the biggest thing is for me is that they are good sports. And we talk about, I stole it from Ben Landers, his good sport code, but my youngest kids have to recite it back to me. And it's something that we commonly have to remind ourselves, right? You did not try out to be in PE class. We are in class to have fun, to be safe, and to move our bodies. And what's helpful for me in my school district is we have a PBIS system, our positive behavioral intervention system, that really lends itself well to what our expectations are. So our PBIS rules in my elementary school are to be respectful, be responsible, and be safe. And what I do now is I just translate that same language and I say, here's what it looks like to be responsible in the gym. Here's what it looks like to be respectful in the gym. Here's what it looks like to be safe in the gym. So we have that common language. And when you can get kids to feel that they're not here to compete at a high level, and of course, the older the students are, it looks a little different, right? So it's if we are involved in a team game that day, we're running two games, right? I'm running one game for the competitive kids, and I'm running one that I'll call a recreational game where they're just going to highlight their skills and they don't even have to keep score, right? So having some choice in terms of what rules you use or what your groupings are or what your teams are, and getting them to understand the overall message that we're here because I want you to love movement and I want you to become lifelong movers. Competition is part of that, but it's not the only piece of it. And I often have to remind them, you play board games and video games and there's winners and losers, right? Like that happens sometimes, but that's not the only piece that comes along with it.
What you're speaking towards is not teaching the 10 or 20% of the athletes in the class and making sure that all students know that PE is for everybody. That's a mindset shift that a lot of teachers either come to during their careers or struggle to come to. Was there a catalyst for you? Or I know that you support a lot of teachers in your district as well. Have you seen a moment where teachers have made that shift? And if so, what does that look like?
For me, it's actually a really personal cause. So I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers. I am by far, and they'll tell you, the most athletic one in the bunch. And I had two older brothers who were more into the arts. And I've always been interested in athletics, and it's always been a huge part of my life. But when I first started teaching, to your point, I was thinking about my brothers in phys ed, and I'm like, they weren't that 10 to 20% that you're teaching to. How do you make that experience really positive for them as well? And I've always tried to gear my teaching towards, because the athletes are the easy ones. They're the ones that are going to compete and they're the ones that want to get involved, but they're not the ones necessarily that I need to worry about being lifelong movers. They're going to do it because it's in their body. I'm a lifelong mover at my age just because that's all I know how to do. But I certainly don't want the other 80% being sedentary. And I think where that comes from is that you have to have programs that are appealing to everyone. And when you only offer team sports, you are losing, like you said, probably 80% of the population. And even to the point of just when they're adults, we know that less than 5% of them are going to stay active through team sports. So I think it's that whole idea on just really focusing on the why. I'm a big proponent in everything I do on the why. And it's funny, the biggest thing I learned when I got to elementary school is that around the holidays, everyone gives you gifts. And I had never received one gift in close to 20 years of teaching. I was sitting there and one student wrote me this really nice handwritten note. And I was like, this is right on cue for what we're going to be talking about. But she's new to our school this year. She's in one of my upper grades. And she said, thank you for making phys ed fun and fair and not focused on competition. And I was like, oh my God, I was so touched and taken back by such a simple note because I was like, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. To hear it verbalized from an elementary student meant a ton to me.
A phrase that you mentioned to me as we were preparing for this episode was keeping the E in PE. When you say you want to keep the education piece front and center, what does that actually look like when you are either planning a lesson, when you are teaching your own lessons, or even when you are supporting teachers that you support in your district?
I know during COVID, we saw a lot of that phrase, and I've always felt that way, that it needs to be an educational classroom, even though it looks so different to, so many outsiders. But again, it comes back to that idea of what are we learning today, not what are we playing today? I think so much of it is whether it was in the college instruction that they received, where it's just get the kids moving, get them moving. They should be moving 90, 95% of the time. And I'm like, That's not right. Maybe 70% of the time, right? Like 30% needs to be instruction, and they need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, why it's relevant, why it's meaningful, how it's going to help them out later in life. And all of those pieces just become so big because if it just becomes anything else, we just roll the ball out. Or as I like to say, we're not glorified recess aides, right? We're not there to just have kids play games. We are there to instruct and to teach. I remember many years ago when I was teaching at the high school, I had a junior or senior, and we were in a floor hockey unit, and he was really struggling with some of the skills. And I said, why don't you like stay after? I got to help you, like just some basics here. And I remember he stayed after one day and he said, why is it so important to you that I know how to play floor hockey? And I said, it's not. I said, but what's important to me is that someday you might become a parent, or you might have nieces and nephews, or you might have neighborhood kids who want to play, and I want you to be able to participate. And he looked at me and was like, okay. Like that, I understand, right? Like there's a social aspect to athletics and movement. And look, when we first started having units of backyard games, I was like, what? Their heart rates aren't going up? No way. And then I was like, wait a minute. That's what they do at graduation parties. That's what they play at the beach in the summer. For us, they're playing spike ball. If that's going to help them with that social aspect, and now they can participate in a social event because they know how to participate and play these games, I'm all for it, right? I'll teach them how to get their heart rates up in other avenues, but I want them to be exposed to all of those things so that they have all of the information to be able to stay active. And all of that comes from the educational piece. And that social aspect of it is so very real, right? Like athletics are very social. So I think those are all really important avenues. And, that idea of keeping the educational factor in it, to your other point, that is how you keep some of that 80% in. They want to know about the research behind it or the technique or, whatever aspect you can hook them on. There's a lot that you can do when you don't just focus on the game, but you focus on everything that, it incorporates.
That's so true. I mean, as an active adult, outside of work, most of my social interactions and family, of course, come from either the hockey team that I'm on or the folks that I know from my local rec center, where I'm at 3 or 4 days a week. My workouts take an hour and a half when they should only take 45 or 50 minutes because you're there to get some exercise, but also to socialize with people. And I wouldn't have that like if I didn't have a love for fitness and being active. Back to your point about how PE is not just about 95% of time spent in physical activity. Jake Miller was on the podcast a few months ago, and he said that our job is not just to have kids leaving class red and sweaty. And that really connected with me because in Denver public schools, luckily it's been a while now, but several years ago, we had a couple of schools who decided to cut their PE program and hire recess coordinators. There's a name for a company out here that kind of does recess type stuff, organized recess. And they decided to can their PE program and hire them because in some building leader or administrator's eyes, they see physical education as just, well, I could either pay this guy $85,000 to get kids red and sweaty, or I could pay this 19-year-old who's working their way through college to come get kids red and sweaty for $20 an hour. The follow-up question I wanted to ask you was on the reputation of a PE program. I often bring my conversations back to this key point. When you implement the things that you're talking about, keeping the educational part of PE front and center, what does that do for the reputation of a PE program, whether it's with students themselves, parents, colleagues, building leaders?
I was thinking of that as you were saying it and talking about the programs that brought in recess and how unfortunate that is. I serve a unique role because I do oversee our curriculum for all 14 schools in the district. So I do have an opportunity to meet with a lot of administrators. But it is why I think the advocacy work behind all of this is so important. And for me, coming on your podcast, it's a little out of my comfort zone, but I think it's so important to do because if we don't advocate for our programs and show people how valuable they can be, and then not only just show, but we actually have to deliver it, right? We can't just talk the talk. We actually have to go deliver that valuable program as well. That's what happens. That's when in my district, we'll see graduation requirements cut because, the value isn't there. Or at the elementary level, they'll replace it with recess because you can't fight that. If someone's going to roll a ball out and get $85,000 a year, might as well pay the hourly wage. So it's so important to show that that value is there. I was at our national conference last year in Baltimore. It's only a couple hours from where I live, and I don't always have an opportunity to get to the national conference depending on where it is. But I went to one of their advocacy sessions that Becky and Mark Fulmer ran, and they run the CBHPE website, which to me, it was like looking at rock stars. I was like starstruck looking at them because I'm like, your site is unbelievable. It was all a session on advocacy, which I do a ton of in my district. And I just kept repeating it to my staff all year, every PD session. They say the best advocacy work you can do is to deliver a comprehensive and meaningful program. And it's true, right? Like when we do that, you don't leave any room for we can cut this, we can cut that, we can reduce this. People see the value. And I've been in my role now for 13 years as the coordinator. This is year 14. And we're really respected at this point. We have a good seat at the table. I get invited to a lot of committee work because, whether it's on the health side or the PE side, people do see the value in what we're doing, and the connections we can make with students are so unique in the gym than what you do in the classroom. And the instruction, right? Those soft skills, which are going to serve wonders for our kids. I share my building with another PE teacher who is outstanding. And it's been amazing what the cultural change has done. We get more money from our admin. Our PTO is more involved and willing. They gave us a rock wall. They paid for me to bring in roller skates last year for a unit. Like when they see that you have this valuable program, everyone jumps on board with it.
Part of when people notice, right, your building leaders or your colleagues, that you're doing more than just rolling out the ball, right? You have a high quality PE program is in the responses that students are able to give them. When an elementary classroom teacher is like walking their kids back to the classroom and they're just making small talk, asking, what did you learn in PE today? What they expect to hear is the name of a sport. We played soccer today. If you're lucky, you might hear them say, we learned how to dribble a soccer ball today. And I think that that's what going back to what I talked about with the language expectation here in Denver, I think that's where it really connects with me, is with the reputation of a PE program. So if a student is able to not just say that they played soccer, not just say that they learned how to dribble today, but also to be able to say that we learned how to compare and contrast dribbling in soccer to dribbling in basketball or stick handling in hockey, etc. That to me is really strong. And a teacher thinks to themselves, I didn't know that they did that type of stuff in PE. And then, like you said, when you deliver, word gets around and the reputation of your PE program is increased. We talked a little bit about planning lessons to meet the diverse needs that students have. What do you do to design learning experiences that are appropriately challenging and accessible for all students? You talked about having one like recreational game where kids might not keep score even and they're focused on their skills, and then having another competitive game for students who want a choice into that. What other things do you do to differentiate for the diverse needs of your students?
In my building as well, we also house our autistic support program for the district. So a lot of autistic support students that are included into our curriculum. And then also I get to see for additional time. So aside from just the normal kind of breakdown of skill level that students have, we also have a large population of autistic support students and special needs students. So that really makes it for a very unique experience. Because when I'm planning out our lesson, if we're involved in some type of a team sport, the first week or two is always going to be station work. And at those stations, anyone can be successful, right? Because you're just working on some of the fundamental skills that you need. And so in that station work, it'll be okay. This is what you're going to work on at that station. Here's how you can level it up. If it's too easy for you, here's what you can do to challenge yourself. If this is too difficult for you, this is what you can do. A lot of just the way that I pair students, the way that I group them, the way that I have different types of choice relative, right? Because you're talking about K-6 population. So it's generally, here's what we're doing, but hey, here's some flexibility within that. I think that there's a million ways that you can do it. I think you just have to be conscious and want to do it. Because of course, at the end of the day, it would always be easier to just say, here's what we're playing today. I don't care if you're here or here, don't worry about it. That's not the reality. They do worry about it, right? So we want every kid feeling successful. I just have a small example. There's a game that our kids love to play when it comes to teaching throwing and catching concepts, and it's called Boom City. And the kids love it. The way to score in the game is to catch a completed pass. Right now, there's a lot more rules to it. But basically, at the end of the day, you have to catch a completed pass. But there's a million other roles that you can play. So maybe your strength is in throwing. Maybe your strength is in catching. Maybe your strength is in literally collecting all of the balls that have gone out of the area and you need to get them back. Maybe your strength is in defending because there are defenders in this game. Maybe your strength is being, the best teammate and encouraging people and putting people in the right spot. So I think no matter what activity we're involved with, I always try to offer how you can be of value in this role, even if it's maybe not something that like everyone would notice or see. And to kind of take it back to where we started, one of the questions, it's a very confusing question for small children, but for my older kids, I'll commonly say to them, if we did something that was more group oriented or team oriented, I'll always say to them, how many of you would have wanted to be on your team today? And it gets them to like take that deeper look and say, "Ooh." And I'm like, is this okay? You might have had a rough day. Maybe you said something to a teammate that you regret. That's the goal, right? Would I want to be on my own team today? Was I a good teammate? And I think you can do that in so many different ways and in so many different lessons. There's always opportunities for kids to succeed. And it might not be because I scored a goal today, right? But that's not realistic in life either. Not everyone stands out for that reason. There's so many ways that, as you know, around here, Jay Wright's a big deal still from Villanova basketball, but he always would talk about be a star in your role. I always like to assure them there's so many different ways that you can be successful here and star in that, and it will infinitely help everyone.
Those two opportunities are really integral in having students feel safe and welcome in PE, like we talked about earlier, and getting students to engage at high levels. So when you give students multiple avenues to be successful, whether it's throwing or catching or defending or being encouraging, they're going to be more likely to stay engaged in the activity. And then when you provide students with an opportunity to reflect on how they presented themselves to their teammates throughout the course of the lesson, would you want to be on your own team today? I mean, I think that's just such a brilliant question. It really lends itself towards this welcoming, inclusive environment that we talked about a little bit earlier. You also mentioned in our conversation today how you are passionate about the why behind what you are teaching and how you bring what students are learning into other real world contexts. I gave an example earlier too about how teachers sometimes at the end of class, they'll ask a question that gets them to transfer their skills into other contexts. That's especially meaningful in the lessons that I've seen where teachers are teaching standards-based social skills. What are some other ways that you help students see the connection between what they're learning in PE and their lives outside of PE class?
Yeah, I think it can look in so many different ways because depending on like the skill, for example, I mean, I do find that the value behind all of it is by far our biggest contribution that we can offer to a student's educational experience. But at the end of the day, as students start to get older, you have less and less want to participate in phys ed. And I'm very cognizant of the reason for that is because they're either lacking the competence or the confidence in their skill set. So it is still important to teach the skills, right? And we want them to be able to do the basics, whether it's to participate when they're older at a graduation party or with their own families someday. But we do want to still teach those, skills because when they're not competent in the skill or they're not confident in their skill, now all of a sudden in secondary, it looks like I'm not going to participate today. So it is a tough one because you're trying to teach a lot of things. To that point, though, I think that there's a lot that you could do. For example, we're starting a bowling unit. And I'm like, okay, it's an underhand roll. Where else do you see this? Where else do we underhand roll? A million kids will raise their hand. Kickball. If I'm a pitcher, I need to be able to underhand roll. Great. If I'm a soccer goalie, I might need to be able to underhand roll. So I think it's easy to make those connections between some of the skill work that you're doing. And then those other ones where it comes to being a good teammate, being a good sport, right? Like all of those pieces, for me, I can make that connection. Hey, how many of you have ever done group work in class? Perfect. I do it with everything. We do a fitness warm up that I rotate pretty much like every month. When I first start teaching them a proper squat, all I tell them is it's exactly what you do when you get back to class and your teacher says, okay, it's time to do your math homework. Everyone take a seat. I said, all you did is a squat. I bring every real life application to any movement that we do, functional movements. I'm down on the floor and I am laying down on my stomach And I'm like, all right, I just got home from school. I'm hungry. I'd throw a bag of popcorn in the microwave. It's my favorite snack. I said, as soon as that microwave goes off, what did I just do to get up to go get the bag of popcorn? And they're like, you did a push up. And I'm like, yeah, I just did a push up. The things that we do in here, I can apply to any context, whether it's the physical skill, whether it's the offensive strategy, defensive strategy. I love playing tag games. There's no tag game that I will not play. We do a lot of themed tag games as our warm ups. I teach them how to tag safely. We use pool noodles, all of those things. But what better game is there to teach offensive and defensive concepts than tag? So when a student is standing in the corner because they think that nobody sees them, and now the tagger comes, and I'm like, well, you just trapped yourself, right? Like you have no out because you're standing in a corner. I coach high school basketball. If my kids dribbled to the corner, we'd be in trouble, right? Keep the ball in the middle of the floor. And I'll say to them, I'll give them the reminders. Do you want to be near the tagger or away from the tagger? They're like, away from the tagger. And I said, if the tagger's coming near you, what do? Move in the opposite direction. Great. It's no different than lacrosse, field hockey, soccer, football, basketball. Like these are all of those applications. So again, like if you're talking about skill, concept, value, I can relay it to anything. I firmly believe there is no more important subject in schools that we teach than health and phys ed. And people will laugh at me all the time at the admin, but they know I believe it. They know I'm crazy enough to believe it. And I'll show them. I'll talk them through how these are the most important things that we do in a kid's educational experience.
A lot of the things that we've been talking about today kind of fall back to a theme of PE being student-centered. That's not something that can happen overnight, but teachers can take steps to eventually lead their classes there. If a teacher who's listening today wants to take one manageable step toward a more purposeful and student-centered PE program, what would you recommend?
I would first challenge them to look at what resources and how students in their community stay active so that you can make it really relevant to what they do. So, for example, we have a state park right around the corner from where I teach, and they have a disc golf course that is known across the country. So, of course, disc golf is a part of what we do because I want to teach them something that they can apply right outside. I worked with a surrounding district back in the summer, and they needed some help in revamping some of their phys ed curriculum. And the first thing I said to him was, how do people stay active in your community? And he said, bowling is huge. I said, great. Are we teaching bowling to all of your students? Because we really want to be able to get the buy-in. If they can see themselves in the curriculum and that's how they stay active in their community, that's a great foot in the door. Fitness is going to be important for any student at any level throughout their lifetime, but there's different ways that you can incorporate it. So I would say to make it meaningful, just literally start with how are people moving in your neighborhood, in your community, and how can I, on some scale, bring it into the classroom? And I think if you start with that, it gives you the larger purpose, it gives you the buy-in, and then you can continue to adapt. I'm very lucky. I have a lot of resources. As pickleball started becoming bigger, we had pickleball courts coming all over. We now have pickleball equipment because as soon as they opened up a huge pickleball facility right down the road from my school, I said, we got to teach these kids pickleball because we know that that's something that they have access to. I want to give them the opportunity to be able to go play that. And what I love about pickleball is that when I first introduced it, so many of the kids said, my grandparents play that, and I said, well, that's great. Now you have something to do with your grandparents. And when I taught at the high school, I used to teach golf a lot, and they would come in and tell me, hey, we went out and played chip and putt this weekend, or I was able to actually do something active with my grandparents. My grandfather loves to golf, and, I can now golf with them. That's awesome. That's what we're trying to do.
Liz, this has been a really inspiring conversation. I want to congratulate you again on your SHAPE PA Teacher of the Year award, and just say that your school and your students and your community are really lucky to have you. So thank you so much for doing this.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And I would say, Gary, I don't know if you have the option to do this, but I'm always happy to reach out and talk to anyone to share experiences. Like you said, I always just want to help people see that there's so much more to phys ed than maybe what people saw from their past, and so much more that it can be. And I think the more that we relay that message and get that out there, the better off our students will be.
Sounds great, Liz. We'll make sure that your contact info is in the notes to the episode. Sound good?
Awesome. Thank you.